Welcome everyone for our third mobile learning webinar. This is the third webinar in a series of 4. We've covered onboarding, instructional support, and today we're going to be covering outreach. And this is part of our work with our work on the mobile learning initiative, and we'll get into a bit more about that. But before we get into our content for today, I just want to turn it over to Ebony Vandross, our wonderful ETC colleague, who will be sharing some tips for using Zoom.
Thanks, Victoria. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Zoom, you can find the meeting controls on the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you can move your mouse down in case it doesn't pop up. You can access chat by clicking the chat icon in that same control panel. And when you make comments or ask questions, please make sure that to everyone is selected, just so that everyone can see your comments and not just the hosts. To find the participant panel, you can click on the participant icon, and that will also bring up some nonverbal controls such as raise hand. And if you have a question or comment or a tech issue and I don't see your comment in the chat, please use the hand raise feature and that will get my attention. If there are any other issues or you have any other questions or need help with anything, please contact me at the email address down below. Thank you.
Great, wonderful, Ebony, thank you. So today we're going to be talking about outreach, and like I mentioned earlier, our work on the Mobile Learning Initiative comes out of the Adult Literacy X Prize Communities Competition, and from that work, in 2018, 2019, we've kind of catalyzed a community of practice around mobile learning, and essentially collecting and curating resources and tools from the field, from practitioners, to help support our work and transitioning to anytime, anywhere mobile learning. So today we're going to be hearing from Jen Vanek, Jeff Gumis, and Melanie Sampson on some of their innovative work around outreach. So we'll hear from Jen. She'll just review some of effective strategies with planning outreach and communications, and she'll share some neat tools. Jeff will go into a bit more different tools that can be used for communications and helping to do outreach. And then Melanie is going to share some of her awesome work at Literacy Works Clear Language Lab on outreach and communication and their communication strategies. So just a few quick reminders here. We have facilitators, Q&A facilitators will be joined by Nora from JVS Boston, Todd from Pro Literacy, and Jeff as well from Crowded Learning. And please, as the presenters are presenting, just chat any questions you have, comments, and Nora, Todd, and Jeff will be going through those and making sure that they get addressed during the Q&A. I'll also be starting a Word document or Google Doc with all of the questions and resources that are shared during this webinar in the chat, and we'll be sending that out after for everyone to see and kind of make sure that that shared knowledge is accessible after the webinar ends. So a few quick reminders, and I'm just going to try to go through these as quickly as possible so we can get started. Like I said, this is the third webinar in a series of 4. Our last webinar is slated for the same time next month, the third Wednesday, which is August 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern. That's 12 Central and 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we'll be discussing evaluation of learning resources during this mobile learning webinar. Another quick reminder, and Ebony will be chatting the link to that to share. Another quick reminder is we are still delivering our distance learning strategy sessions, which are under our Tips for Distance Learning website. I think many of you are familiar with this work. Ebony will be chatting a link to this website, which is a wonderful resource. And I also want to point out that we are offering free small group and one-on-one coaching. And so Ebony will be chatting the link for that, and we have sessions lined up on a bi-weekly basis, and you can kind of book sessions with both one-on-one and sessions within the small group coaching with the coaches. Great, so what I wanted to do now was just pause and do a quick preview of the site. I think many of you have joined our other sessions and are very familiar with how the site is organized, but for those that are new, I just wanted to quickly show. So if you go to edtech.worlded.org and just click on this mobile learning tab at the top navigation, you'll be brought to the Mobile Learning Resource Hub. You can learn all about this initiative, everything that I mentioned, from the history with the Adult Literacy X Prize initiative to who is currently on the leadership team, and all our work with mobile learning implementation. And then really the bulk of this site is the tools and resources. So today we're going to be covering the tools and resources in outreach. So when you click on outreach, you'll see some of the resources. You'll see a little blurb about, what is outreach and what are the components of effective outreach in the context of mobile learning implementation. And then you'll see some of the resources that we'll review today. Click on a resource, for example, the communications planning template that Jen is going to introduce to you all and review, and you click on Get Resource, you'll be able to automatically download, get that. This is, for example, a Word document. Just open that up and it's there. And we encourage everyone, if you've used this resource, if you found it helpful, or you use this resource in tandem with another tool, whatever it may be, please share your feedback, comments, any suggestions here. The other item that I wanted to point out is that we are actively looking for more tools to share on our site. And we're really hoping to just get all of these awesome resources that you and your teams have used and get them on the site. So the way that you can submit a resource or tool is by clicking this link here, and this will bring you to a Jot form, and Ebony will chat this link as well. And you'll just submit the resource using this form. So that's it, I think. I'm going to go back to the slides here and just make sure I didn't miss anything before I turn it over to Jen. Yep, just, we really encourage you all to share ideas and feedback by commenting on the resource using the submit a comment box. And then we really encourage you to submit a resource, especially for evaluation. We're looking to build out those set of evaluation and assessment tools. So please do share any resources our way. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Great, thanks a lot. I will share my screen with you.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about planning strategic outreach, just as a backdrop to the information that Jeff and Melanie are going to be sharing. And the key consideration here is basically that your message is strategically targeted to specific audiences, and that you're answering these primary questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how for each of the audiences. So for example, you need to think about exactly who you're trying to reach out with your distance learning or distance education program, the curricula that you're using, the demands of your program, the characteristics of the learners that you're thinking to support, and then how you're going to reach them. So I'm just sharing this by way of example because this is a really nice example of targeted outreach from a program in Virginia that was looking to recruit young adults who were of age to take adult basic education courses, but who had been homeschooled and had yet to complete their GED or their high school equivalence exams. So very specific targeted outreach that was sent out to homeschooling groups in the area of the adult basic ed program for Lord Fairfax Community College, and had great results in getting students to sign up for their online GED program. So how did they get to this point where they knew that this was a need, that they knew they figured out that this would be a good way to reach these learners? There was actually some structure to this process, and just want to share with you what that might look like. But first I just want to say, so the work that I'm about to talk about comes from the ISTE SkillRise initiative. Both Jeff and I helped advise on the development of this SkillRise framework document and on the resulting course that we put together. The SkillRise document, the framework document, walks you through all of the considerations that you should be thinking about and decision steps, milestones along the way in adopting a technology or a new technology program to do the work that you do. So with the case of many of you, I'm sure that is to support adult basic skills students at a distance, I'm sure, and specifically through mobile learning right now. So you could just get this at skillrise.org, and I recommend checking it out. I do know that there's going to be the next iteration of the course that walks you through those steps is going to be starting in October, and ISTE is looking to recruit students now for that. So do check out skillrise.org for information about that course and for access to the framework. So the thing I want to just talk through today is to share with you it's an altered version of one of the resources that I made for that ISTE course, and it's intended for you to access and to use as a plan to help you think through the what, why, who, and how for the messaging that is going to bring the learners that you're looking to add to your distance education program. This document, as Victoria told you, is one of the linked resources in our outreach section of the mLearning Resource Hub, and you can see it here. And essentially, what I want to share with you about this resource is that it might not be possible for you to think about one communication strategy for all of your programming, that you might actually need to think about more strategic and refined, planful means of communicating with different types of students for different purposes. So the example of the Lord Fairfax Community College ABE program reaching GED students was because they were looking to boost participation in their online GED class. And they happened to know that there was a large homeschooling community near them. And so they needed to think about targeted outreach to bring those people in. Those weren't necessarily participants who were looking for adult basic education or adult basic skills programs, but with the targeted outreach where they were able to really refine their message and say, hey, look, consider this as like an extension of your homeschooling. You can work online and get your GED, and they were able to, because of that refined message, were able to bring students in. So this is, not rocket science, I have to say, but I think that thinking through some of the questions in this form can help you land on a few different types of messages for different purposes and different audiences that can help you extend the reach of your program. A second example that I'd like to share is also on the outreach site, and that one actually also happens to be from Lord Fairfax Community College, and that is using social media to support your students, to support bringing in students into your program. So you can access what I'm about to show you here, but I'm going to go to the slide just because it'll be a little bit bigger. Lord Fairfax Community College also decided that they were going to actively seek tech-savvy students for their distance education programs. And to do that, they decided to do a lot of recruiting through social media. And what you're seeing right now is a really interesting twist that you can do if you have a page on Facebook. You can actually set up a link a linked pop-up from Facebook Messenger that serves as an early sort of automated way to communicate with students who are interested. And I thought what Lord Fairfax Community College did was really interesting here, because they added this poll to the Messenger pop-up, and then they were able to respond. It would go to their Messenger box, and they were then able to do a targeted response to each of these students, based on whatever they indicated here as a primary question. The instructions, so this is actually a great example of one of the resources that we have on our site. I have the photo of the example, and then also some step-by-step instructions that you could use to do something like this yourself. I've also heard of programs starting to use WhatsApp Instagram for, in a very similar way, and with great success as more and more Gen Z especially, and millennials are using Instagram, then they might be using Facebook. Okay, so that, I told you it would be short and sweet, and more or less setting the stage for what Jeff and Melanie will follow with, but happy to entertain any questions.
Hi, everyone. This is Nora Sheridan. Jen, thanks so much for all that information. So I'm looking at the chat in case anyone has questions for Jen about her presentation. Maybe while people are thinking. Oh, no, here we go. With social media, how do students find those Instagram posts or Facebook pages?
I think it's the digital word of mouth and through the chains of their own networks. I mean, I think that's the intent when you are using social media for something like that. And I think especially in these days where people are seeing each other less in person, it really, you're not probably going to have as much like in-person word of mouth for program recommendations and reach. So I think if you're from a program that hasn't yet started to use social media, I think it'd be a really good time to start. And you could think about some targeted outreach through your partners that you might be working with, like social service providers, other community-based organizations, workforce development organizations, and have them share your Facebook page through their own social media. And hopefully that way you can kind of trickle down to reach the actual social media accounts of the learners that you're supporting. Todd asks, oh, go ahead, Nora. I'm doing it.
Well, will we be able to see the instructions for the Facebook pop-up that you showed?
Yeah, they're actually in the linked resource that's on the mobile learning site. So if you go to our site, the site Victoria previewed, and you click on outreach, what I just showed you as a slide is actually a PDF that's on the site. And those instructions come right from Facebook. Okay, so I think at this point I'll turn it over. I just realized I just kind of glossed over one thing that I should have said a little bit more about, and that is the difference, and this is actually a nice setup for Jeff. I talked about, I don't know if you noticed, but one of the words that I used in that linked resource was a channel of communication. And that's essentially just thinking about the means by which you're going to reach people. So the idea is that different audiences access information through different media and in different ways. So you want to try to spread your reach as far as possible and use different channels. So Facebook, Instagram, other social media are great for reaching digitally savvy youth or young adults. I want to share one more quick example. We have a partner that works in Traverse City, Michigan, and she knew that she had a lot of potential learners who were accessing Wi-Fi at McDonald's and in the area. So she convinced McDonald's to add information about her program on tray liners at their fast food restaurants. So she, she knew she was reaching people who might not be connected digitally, and so she chose a non-digital format for that outreach. And in that situation, it worked out really well for her. So for more on the actual technologies that support different channels of communication, I will turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me first of all?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna pop in. So thanks, Jen. That was awesome. And I'm actually going to repeat a couple of things that Jen said. This is sort of, we have a nice progression here talking about sort of some of those strategies for framing your communication. And now I'm going to be talking about the tools that you might use to support these outreach efforts. So my name is Jeff Gumas from Crowded Learning. We focus on free, heavily focused on free content and content resources to support educators and learners in terms of providing high quality resources that otherwise tend to be underutilized by instructors and learners. And so obviously since COVID, there's been a heavy increase in seeking out those types of resources. But as Jen said, the tools by which we are delivering those resources and the tools by which learners are accessing those is going to vary. And so we've been doing a lot of work around helping educators sort of frame and think about the various technologies that they're using and considering, what is the purpose of that technology, both in terms of the tools and then also in terms of the content. Because I think we've all, as Jen mentioned, both she and I worked on that SkillRise framework, and we've also developed a course for it. Choosing technology, choosing resources is intended to be something that is not, on the fly. It should be intentional. It should be strategic. We've all been forced over the past 4 months to have sort of very knee-jerk reaction to selecting things in order to keep things going. And so now that we've sort of settled into some things, the time has come for us to consider what's working, what's not, what tools are effective, and how can we maximize our impact, knowing that our future is uncertain. And so out of the gate, we had developed some tools to help folks sort of make some selections in terms of what types of resources they could be using. And over time, we've been evolving in terms of helping organizations really think about what are they trying to do with the technology, and how do you sort of match the right technology with your goals. And so in considering technology, there's sort of really 3 questions. What do I want to accomplish? Which tools will afford me the ability to accomplish this? And then what are the logistics that we need to consider? And that could be what students are already using. So, as Jen mentioned, we have different learner types out of the gate. If organizations were already using technology as their means of communication, they had a more seamless transition. Everyone's transition was a little bumpy, but the more sort of integrated that technology was into regular practices before COVID, it made it easier to transition to sort of fully distance once we had school closures. And so, in considering how to even connect with your students, you all have sort of real-time knowledge that happened about 4 months ago, where you realized that you had to employ different techniques to actually just connect and reestablish connection with your learners. And unfortunately, in some cases, we hear over and over again that, there was attrition of learners because of the fact that either it was too difficult to sort of maintain that connection, or obviously there's priorities that sort of surfaced in the midst of what's going on right now. And then we've also obviously seen all of the things related to access. And then we also have to consider what folks' skill levels are. And so, as I mentioned out of the gate, we had created, and I'm just going to hop into that right now, a teacher tools page, which Jen actually references on the communication plan template, as a place for you to go to consider what tools you might want to use, categorized by sort of how you would use them. So video conferencing tools, chat and messaging tools. We get into content resources and other things, but obviously for the sake of outreach, we're looking at some of these tools that you might use for that. The other thing that we built, and I'm realizing you probably should add this to the mobile learning resource site, sorry guys, is we created an implementation plan template. And it's similar in structure to what Jen shared, but we focus on sort of the all-encompassing things that you need to consider around communication. So what is my purpose? What are the logistics? What are the tools that are available? Around instructional content. So again, what is the purpose? In some cases, there are resources that the learners can access sort of on their own and work on their own. On others, You have to be more intimately involved, and then what are the tools? And then on management and tracking your students. So the content and the management and tracking really gets into sort of once you've actually brought students in and they're working with you, but the communication portion is obviously super relevant in terms of the outreach piece. And so when you're considering that communication, just like we talked about, I just said with transitioning into fully distance, wanting to sort of connect with learners on the tools that they're using, the same thing happens, you know, in terms of trying to consider if I'm going to use this communication tool for outreach, and if that's the most effective tool for actually getting in touch with learners, then it's probably a tool that I should try to carry over into part of my routine instructional strategy as well, because that's what learners are using. And so the various tools that we have for communication really, and again, all of these are ones that you've been employing now. If we want to be sort of in touch immediate with students, you have video conferencing. Many of you have started using Zoom and Google Meet. You have email, which is more asynchronous, and there's not an expectation of real-time sort of communication. And then messaging, which tends to be the most popular. My guess would be that 90% of you have employed 3 or more of these communication tools over the past 4 months. As Jen said, there's not going to be one that works best for everybody, but in thinking about your logistics, understanding sort of who your audience is and what's going to be the best way to connect with them. So what we have seen since things started is that students are most familiar and the most popular sort of form of communication, particularly with the younger set, is with messaging. And quite frankly, it is sort of the means by which a majority of people tend to be more apt to be responsive because you get that notification. I've always said if you leave me a voicemail, then you technically didn't even try to contact me because I'm so bad about leaving voicemail or checking my voicemails. And so what we've seen is that WhatsApp is a tool that we know that a lot of learners are using outside of school for social purposes. And it is one that teachers have started to incorporate into their instruction. And it's a perfectly good tool for connecting by way of outreach. Remind is one, again, that is popular in education. And this is one that you would technically use once students are actually sort of in a class, because you can create classes and you can send out your messaging through that with folks who you have already brought into your program. And so this is nice because it works almost like mass email, but through texting. The third one that I'm actually going to point out, and this is one that I've started playing around with, this is one that I learned about 2 weeks ago at COABE because someone mentioned it to me during a presentation, is talking points. And so this is very similar to Remind, but it allows you to text in real time, and it provides real-time translation. And so I'm just going to hop over that just to show you what that looks like. So I've created of course now this, or I have to compose first, sorry. So I'm going to select myself, and I can create a templated message that can be sent out. So if you had an outreach message, you know, we noticed you are interested. Sorry, I can type. I can save this as a template if I want. And so that would be a templated message that I send out to anyone. Now, when I click send, it's going to go to, I set this up as me. This message is going to be sent via text. There is an app, but it is sent via text. And I'm going to quickly just show you what I see on my end on my phone. Right here. So I just got this message in Spanish. Now I had to know that this person, their native language was Spanish, but now I'm sending the message in English. They are receiving the message in Spanish, and then they can respond in their native language. Sorry, you're gonna see my broken Spanish. And so if I send something in Spanish on the app, it's going to take a second here, but I'm going to receive a message that is in English, that I receive in English. And so with these student profiles, you can actually set the language to, there's a slew of languages within there that you have the ability to assign to a student. And so then you can send out a single message to a group of students, and they are all going to be getting their message in their native language. Now, of course, it's not working, but I promise you, I tested this out earlier and it did. But this is a really interesting tool. I encourage folks to check it out. If you are bilingual, I would love to hear your opinions on how strong the translation is in terms of the language translation. But what's also nice is in here, when it actually comes through, oh, maybe this is why I didn't see it. Here it is. When is the next class? Sorry, I didn't learn correctly how to use this. So you can see how it translated for that student. And you can also see how your message translated to that student. So I think this is a really interesting tool for being able to do that. I'm going to stop showing my phone, and now I'm going to hop into this last slide. So in terms of thinking about outreach and some of these other tools that you're using, one of the things I've also noticed is people are being more open on their websites and making themselves just more available. So things are changing on a rapid basis. And so, you know, being able to update your website on a very sort of nimble basis is really important. So lots of folks have started putting up Google Sites, and they're using Google Sites in different ways as a sort of hub where they can put information out about all of their sort of scheduled info meetings or even open classes. And so we have seen some organizations, if you're running Zoom classes and your students obviously register for those classes, that's fine. You have like 100 people that you could put onto that Zoom. So some folks are just putting up open links so that people can register for classes that might be of interest. Well, you get that registration report. So you're going to see other students or other people who might have dropped in out of interest for a class that you posted on your website. And now you have their contact information and you can reach out to them. Calendly is another tool that I hadn't even thought of as putting up as an outreach tool, but somebody submitted this to us, and this is a career navigation coach, and she uses Calendly, which is a free tool that allows you to set up on a regular basis when you might have open office hours or open ability for somebody to connect and learn about your program. And all they have to do is click on these links, and I just clicked on this teacher or navigator had set up the opportunity for folks to set up a 15-minute Zoom meeting with her. And so now when I click on these, I see all of the times that are available. If I were to select the 7 o'clock time and schedule it, she's going to get a notification. I'm going to get a calendar invite. And then the next person that tries to set something up on the 16th is not going to be able to set up that time. So again, just thinking about how can you use these tools to make yourself more openly available so that when people land on there, they have a way of immediately connecting with you. As opposed to sort of sending something off and hoping they hear back from you. So I'm going to stop there and take any questions.
So this is Todd. So first of all, I guess we've got just a lot of people think that the resources you've shown are very, very cool. We did have a question about what software you were using for sharing your phone.
Yeah, so so you actually have the ability, if you have an Apple device, and we did this last week actually at the distance learning strategy sessions. In Zoom, you actually, when you're doing a screen share, if you have an Apple device, an iOS device, you can share your screen on that. The tool that I use to share my phone is called Reflector Teacher. It is not free. But it's a $19 one-time fee, and I really think it's kind of worth it. obviously because of all of the things that we're trying to show learners that in many cases are app-based.
And you said that's called Reflector?
Yeah, Reflector Teacher. I'll post it in the chat once we're done with the Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. And then let's see, I think that someone mentioned StreamYard. Are you familiar with that
I am not.
app or service? They said it's a Zoom-like platform, but directly uploads to Facebook, YouTube, and other platforms.
That's a fun thing for me to investigate afterwards. No, I have not heard of it, but I'll check it out.
And then, Jeff, I had one more question. So I know from a lot of programs, some programs kind of took the approach of having not done any of this before, of just focusing on one technology to kind of learn and figure out, like Zoom or something like that. Other programs took the approach of just communicating with whatever variety of ways that their students communicated. Do you have any kind of recommendations or guidance for how to balance between focusing on one to focusing on many, to kind of arriving at some sort of balance of technologies so that you can actually kind of become good at some and drive your students maybe to those?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, we've all been conducting a 4-month pilot, right, of trying things out and out of necessity. And so I really do think we're at a point where we all need to be reflecting, and that involves talking with your teachers, talking about where you found successes, talking about the challenges that you had, and also reaching out to your students. I think whereas there've been lots of obstacles, there's also been lots of surprises that educators have found in terms of their own ability to start using a new technology, as well as their students. And so you're absolutely correct. You know, there's tons of tools out there, and it really comes down to wanting to narrow in on a few that you know are going to be able to be widely accessed. Inevitably, you're going to run into some challenges with certain students. I'm running a ed tech PD program right now in Google Classroom. It's my first time running something in Google Classroom, and I'm seeing all the hiccups of, people trying to just get into the Google Classroom. Some people are able to do so quickly. Others, just, quite frankly, out of never having done it, are having some challenges. But we'll clear that hurdle, and then I'm going to know for next time the things and supports that I need to provide in order to onboard people more quickly.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think it's time to move on.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jeff and Todd, for facilitating. So next up we have Melanie. Melanie, would you like me to share my screen, or would you like to share your screen? Oh, sorry, I have to unmute you. You should be unmuted now, or you can unmute rather.
Yes. Hi. I'm happy to share the screen if that works okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pull it up. 1 second. Okay. Get back to the beginning. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, and you can hear me okay.
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie. Thank you so much to World Ed for having me. I'm with an organization called Literacy Works, and we are an organization that provides capacity building support to literacy organizations, primarily in the Chicagoland area, but now we've gone virtual, so we have a whole array of online workshops as well. And over the last decade, we noticed that more and more often our adult learners that our organizations were working with were going out into the world and encountering a lot of barriers in all different facets of life. So we really expanded our work over the last several years, and that's what the Clear Language Lab grew out of, to support adult learners by recognizing some of these challenges and systems that they are often accessing, and really trying to flip the script that the problem isn't that the learners don't know how to use the system. The problems are that the systems aren't always clear or they're overly complicated. And so really trying to kind of tackle these issues from both sides of helping learners get the support they need from their programs, but also recognizing that these systems can be doing better for our learners. So yeah, that's the focus of our work. My background is in adult education, so I was an adult educator for many, many years. I worked in one of the most diverse neighborhoods here in Chicago for a long time, so I had the opportunity to work with students from a lot of different backgrounds. So that really influences my work here at the Clear Language Lab. I can't tell you how many times I had students bring me documents or letters in the mail or had me get on the phone with someone because the communication was unclear. And I'm sure many of you have had that experience as well, either in your role or maybe just in regular life. I know every time I go to the doctor's office, I take little notes for my work of things that I think could have been perhaps more clear and more effective. I also think it's challenging as adult educators. We often have to wear a lot of hats. So you might not have realized you needed to be a social media expert or a graphic designer or you know, all of these different things that may have been out of your purview before. So I want to talk about, again, just some resources to share that I hope can be supportive in that way, and to think about advocating, even if you feel like, you know what, I do this pretty well, but you notice that you have to interact with a communications department that isn't on the same page with this stuff, or your community partners are sending you flyers that you know your participants can't make sense of. I think that's another way to think of this work, is also just advocating for our participants out in the world through some of these things, even if we get to a point where our program is a rock star at doing this. So I think there's a couple different ways that this can work for you. So, you know, and thinking about what affects our ability to understand so many things, our work is around people who may have barriers to literacy and other sorts of systemic barriers related to inequality and oppression. But so many things can affect how we understand stuff, right? Like how hungry we are, our background knowledge about a subject, our health, how tired we are, you know, just our personal executive functioning skills. There's so many different things. So I think keeping that in mind when we're creating content, to have a sort of a universal approach to how we're trying to make things as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, while at the same time recognizing, like Jen mentioned, that you might be tailoring things to certain populations and certain groups to be most effective. I want to share a funny internet story, because I think this really illustrates this idea, because I think a lot of times it can be really hard for us to see when this might come up in our own work. This is an example of, this was on the internet a couple years ago on Twitter, and a wife had asked for a highlighter and a brush for their anniversary present. And so her husband brought this home and was very proud. He said, I know Sharpie is a good brand of highlighter, and this brush seemed like a nice brush you might like. But ultimately, the wife chuckled a little bit before she put it on the internet. What she actually wanted was this. She'd wanted a Fenty highlighter and brush, which is a makeup brand from Rihanna. And, you know, they had a good chuckle about it, and it was a funny thing. But these are two people that knew each other pretty well. And you know, still had this miscommunication about something, about, you know, his background knowledge was not the same as hers. He had a different idea of what this vocabulary meant. So this is sort of just a funny anecdote, but when we think about how we might translate that to miscommunication that can happen in the everyday world, it can have really serious consequences of people not understanding critical information, not feeling like something is for them that is for them. You know, so many different things can go wrong. And this isn't just with provider and participant, but this also could be between employees. Like a significant amount of miscommunication that happens in the health field actually happens between professionals. So if you've ever had, I know I spent 10 minutes one time talking to a colleague about Harold Washington, thinking I was talking about our community college and she was talking about our library. And we spent 10 minutes trying to negotiate that sort of conversation before we realized we were talking about different things. So I think this kind of stuff can happen all the time. A lot of us aren't going to want to say in the middle of a meeting with a colleague that we don't know. But I encourage you to kind of call out those things and say when people aren't being clear, because I think it starts to help raise people's awareness that we need to be really mindful about how we're communicating, especially in this world that's so rich with communication and people are being bombarded with information all the time. This is an example from an excerpt you might see on an ESL Programs website. I think you can see that there can be some challenges here. If our student is perhaps a student with an academic background that has come from university and is learning English in the United States, but doesn't have a lot of other barriers, maybe they can work their way through this. But if that isn't who our student is, who is this kind of text serving? So I think these are the types of conversations that we want to be able to have and think about. What are the things in here that are going to be like, what does this even mean? Is this for me? Or even if a student's daughter is reading this, can she make sense of it and go, oh, I really want to send my mom to this program who just came to the United States and doesn't speak English. This seems like she's going to get what she needs out of it. So again, that idea that Jen brought up earlier of really thinking about who our audience is, I think it can be challenging sometimes too, because we've got a lot of stakeholders, we've got funders, and we've got government bodies, and we've got our board, and all these other stakeholders that want things to look and sound a certain way. And I think it's really important we make sure that we're not sacrificing the communication that our participant gets. And I've written things like this before too. I spent a whole week once on a brochure that I ended up going, why did I make this? And I gave it to our development person because I realized that none of my students were going to it wasn't going to resonate for them. So I also have flashbacks to some forms that I worked with as an adult educator. And I'm like, why didn't I redo that form? So I think this is a work in progress. I think it's always something to just be thinking about growing in and not feeling like, focusing on how it was, but focusing on how can we make it better, I think is the attitude I try to take with this. So this is a simple definition of plain language that I think resonates pretty well, but it's really just the idea that we're making things so that people can understand them. I know that seems really simple, but if we think about all the complex things we might encounter in the world, we know that this does not always happen. We think about even when we back in the day when we went to a coffee shop and we'd sign on to Wi-Fi, who reads the terms of use? Pretty much nobody, because they don't always feel meant to be read. So trying to get away from that feeling of we don't want you to know, but increasing transparency so that systems can be more equitable. So I think that it can be complicated to think about what we're sharing, because sometimes we have the idea of what we think is important, and maybe people really need to know X, Y, and Z, but we also want to be mindful of the fact that the reader is coming and wanting to know something. What is it that they want to know, and what are the things that maybe they don't even know they need to know, but we know that will be valuable for them. And then we've got these limitations of systems, like Jen's example with McDonald's, like there's no Wi-Fi in the town. So how can we get around that? I know I've definitely encountered situations in my work where I've gone to programs and had to watch students fill out 17 pages of paperwork. I think that would be a barrier to participation for a lot of people. Or being told, oh, this person's going to tell them that information in that part of the process. And then but that doesn't really happen. We know how things happen in nonprofits. We get really busy, and the best laid plans don't always happen. So how do we build in infrastructure in our communication, in our system, so that the messages that we need to get out, get out? I think a big part of this that comes up is this idea of the curse of knowledge. So this is just the idea that once we become experts at something, like our jobs, it can be really hard to unknow what we know and talk to people with a fresh lens. So I think it's really important to involve different people in your processes, particularly participants, but you'll find that you might be able to uncover some of these sticky points that we assume everybody knows because it's our everyday work. This is just one example from a different sector. We did a project with a legal aid advocacy organization, and you can see the original sort of infrastructure was a little bit more fact-based, and we actually broke it down into little vignettes where they could apply the information they were learning. So the goal of this was to help domestic workers understand their rights because some of the laws had changed. And we have more examples like this on our website. I'd love for you to check those out if you would like to see more like that. And then again, just who is the audience? Each of these flyers might have a different audience, and just being really mindful of that. In the upper left-hand corner, does someone know what social networking means to know that that means Facebook? You know, so maybe that their audience knows that, and that's no big deal. But if they don't, you know, these are the types of nuanced things like Jen mentioned that we need to think about. So these are some of the buckets that I sort of think about when I'm working on a project. So in my role, I do training like this, but I also do materials review projects for people because sometimes it's easier to have someone else fish for you than take a class to learn how to fish. So these are 4 areas that sort of I dive into in a lot of my work and in my trainings. So audience, as Jen talked about, thinking about organization and cohesion, thinking about how many buckets of information do you have? Is it super dense and people aren't going to make it to the 3rd sentence? You know, do you have 85 bullet points that are overwhelming and we need to pare those down? All of those kinds of conversations are the types of things we talk about. Words, thinking about what are essential words that people maybe do need to know. How do we talk about those concepts in a way that people understand? Are they going to know what WIOA means on a flyer? Maybe, maybe not. How do we make sure that we're getting the meaning across to the audience and not just what we want to tell them? And then I think design is a huge part of this. You know, I didn't have a background in graphic design, but in the last several years, I've really had to grow my skills in this area because I found that I couldn't really separate text from the image that was being presented. So I really love tools like Canva that really, I think, democratize design and make it so that, you know, I really value people who can create art and do graphic design, but I also know the reality that many of us don't have those sort of infrastructures in place in our organization. There's a book I always recommend to people too. It's called The Non-Designer's Design Handbook, and it highlights some key things if you are making a lot of social media or posters. I highly recommend that too. I think that's just a good book to know about, and I can share it out with you. I don't know the author. I just really thought it was a helpful book that's shaped a lot of the work I do. I do want to mention, like in Clear Language Lab, we also do quarterly workshops that are free. So I would love to tell you about those. We have one coming up about writing inclusive content to support LGBTQIA participants. We also do a cohort. I saw a shout out, thanks Diane, where that's more intensive. And we spend 6 hours together working through content. And then in our community literacy program, we've got a variety of topics that we cover too that are aimed at adult education providers. So I encourage you to check all those out. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to talk to you about them. And then we also have a tip sheet that kind of reiterates these themes that will be on the CrowdEd website too. So I wanted to make sure to throw that up there. So the book is called, I'll put the name, it's called The Non-Designer's Design Handbook, and it's written by Robin Williams, not the Robin Williams, but another person named Robin Williams, so you won't forget it. Yeah, and I think I hit all my things. Sometimes I spend 6 hours talking about this, so I did my best to get it into a shorter time frame. But Jeff, are there any questions that we should hit on?
Sure. So there's been a lot of comments about how cool this is. And I don't know if you have it up and ready, but I'd love for you to show the PDF that you created that we're going to be uploading to the mLearning site.
Yeah, I can. Give me 1 second.
Like me, you probably have 1,000.
Yes, I have too many tabs up all the time. Yeah, so this is a little bit more of an overview of the things that I just kind of sped through. So you can see here, I've got some key points around some of these ideas. It's not exhaustive, but it's a good start related to audience, organization, and cohesion. So you didn't have to take notes and remember everything I said. Words and clear design, and my contact information too. So yeah, I'm happy to chat with anyone too further about some of these things. And like I said, we've got some more examples on our website. If you go to the Clear Language Lab section, you can see some examples of our work.
Yeah, I'd encourage going there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a lookbook that has some examples here that you can learn more about. So yeah.
Great. One question that did come in is, what are some tools or mechanisms you use for collecting user feedback so that you can make programs, make language and communications and design more accessible for folks?
That's a great question. So I think there's different ways that people can do it, and it, you know, depends on your resources and your time. I think really the key point is engaging your participants, whoever that is and whatever the situation is. So for example, I know when I worked at the community center, I had like a little student council that would meet, and when I needed feedback about different things, they would engage around some of those ideas. So do you have some sort of advisory group that you have access to in your participants? Can you make one so students can feel engaged and part of the processes? I think some of it's observation. I know we noticed, you know, at registration sometimes people are waiting too long. So how do we make this better? You know, and really just trying to think outside the box and go, you know what, maybe they only need to fill out this form right now and we can do the other forms later. So some of it's observation and just being willing to like try different things and see what works. The last one is just actually having focus groups. So bringing in participants together. I actually have a little cohort of adult learners that I reach out to when I need feedback about some things, and I gather a few of them together, and I've actually been able to do it over Zoom, and it's been a really cool process to have them be able to give me feedback on documents that I'm working on for other projects, and of course we compensate them with a gift certificate for their time and energy. So yeah, I think there's different ways to go about it. It depends on your capacity and your time, but I think definitely at the center of it is getting feedback from the people on the ground. And centering sort of their interests and their needs and making sure that they're included in the process, if that makes sense.
Those are all, yeah, no, excellent suggestions. And there's someone else here. I've attended Melanie's session in the past. It's one of the best workshops I've ever been to. I will say that again. It's really good. But I think just one thread that I think you've heard through all three of these is sort of starting with the learner, right? And who is your audience, and that is who you need to connect with in order to work backwards in terms of how you're doing this outreach. So I think I'm going to pass it on to, thank you, Melanie. For
Jeff, can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Sorry, I saw Hillary's comment, and I really want to mention that yes, it can be hard sometimes when you've got people that have different sort of interests or motivations to make the case of like why stuff needs to be clear, especially, I hope we don't have any lawyers on the call, especially lawyers. I'm happy to share any resources out sort of for some people. I think obviously for me, this is a social justice issue, this is an equity issue, but I think for some people, they might be drawn more to things around effectiveness. So I think if you're looking for resources about that, please feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about examples that have improved how the processes work too. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Melanie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff and Melanie. So I'm just going to grab screen share and go back to our presentation here. If I can find it. Yeah, this works. Wonderful. So just a quick reminders, we are right out of time. Perfect. That was so helpful. Thank you, Jen, Jeff, and Melanie, and also facilitators, Nora, Jeff, and Todd. A reminder that the resources mentioned here are all on our site, and we encourage you to comment. We'll also be posting some of Melanie's resources that she mentioned. And Jeff, I'll be following up with you on that resource that you mentioned as well during your presentation. And please, we encourage you all to submit a resource. Again, we'll be sending out those links along with notes from the session today. Thank you all so much. And we look forward to seeing you again in August for our final mobile learning implementation webinar. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.